Good day, my name is Anthony Patch, and this is another edition of Pulse. Today's August the 13th, Tuesday, and the title of today's Pulse is Pieces of War. Pieces of War. Have quite a few notes here in front of me. We're going to be speaking about, of course, the Middle East and Ukraine. I'm going to start off with Ukraine, and then we will get into a deeper discussion as to the present situation in the Middle East and where it appears that things are heading toward. With respect to Ukraine, I'd like to start off with what I like to refer to as a big picture perspective on what is taking place there, and from my estimation, really what is what I would refer to as the causal factor. What is the etiology to this entire conflict between Ukraine and Russia? As I think most of you already appreciate, Ukraine is really operating as a proxy of the United States and the Western nations, including Western Europe. Much has been said about NATO. NATO is not really the focal point as I view it. This is really economic. This has to do with the preservation of the reserve currency of the world as it stands right now. And that, of course, is the US dollar and all that involves in terms of the US dollar being the primary currency for the settlement of cross-border transactions, international transactions. Again, as I think most of you can appreciate, the present model of the world economic system, the paradigm of the global economy, is one based upon debt. This is a debt-based global economy. If you would, picture an inverted pyramid. At the top of the pyramid are derivatives. Really, everything within a debt-based global economy is not so much an asset as everything is truly an instrument of debt, a debt instrument. Derivatives, by definition, derive their value from underlying asset classes. So at the top, you have trillions of dollars, if not, by my estimation, between 2 and 4 quadrillion measured in or denominated in US dollars, some 4 quadrillion in derivatives. This encompasses all of the debts in the global debt-based economy. This value, as you drill down through the pyramid, so at the top you have the broad base of the inverted pyramid of derivatives as the largest class of debts, of debt instruments. Beneath that large class, predominant class of derivatives, you find all other forms of debt. This would include sovereign debts denominated in bonds issued by the sovereign states of the world and their central banks. And then you move down through that. We could look at the stocks of the stock markets. We can look at commercial real estate. We can look at residential real estate and so forth, and drill right down to the individual sovereign currencies, the denominated notes of the nations. And these currencies draw their initial valuation when they are first printed in terms of an underlying asset class. If we take the US dollar, for example, prior to then President Nixon in 1970, 71, 72, he moved the US dollar off the gold standard, which allowed the US government to then become indebted in the form of printing money beyond the physical gold that was being held as the basis for the currency. And of course, this has resulted in the US and really all nations of the planet involved in deficit spending. And the US is now trillions of dollars in debt. Some estimates say we're $2 trillion in terms of government debt. Well, it's way beyond that. So the numbers are really irrelevant. At the tip of this inverted pyramid, you would find gold, silver, oil, natural gas resources, natural resources, providing the foundation for global economies and thus their currencies. The issue with Ukraine is that Ukraine sits on some $2 trillion worth of natural resources. Ukraine, during the Soviet era, was the breadbasket for the Soviet Union. Today, prior to the war, it has provided it was the predominant source for nitrogen-based fertilizers here in the United States. So overall, the big picture with Ukraine, why? Why Ukraine? Why the United States spending billions and billions of dollars in support of Ukraine? Why the military support along with the financial? Why the political support? Why demonizing Russia and this just delusional mindset on the part of the U.S. leadership? And when I say leadership, I mean political and financial leadership in the United States that seems hell-bent on breaking up the Russian Federation into individual states. Well, that's the surface dialogue. The real undercurrent for the reason for this conflict is it is a battle over resources. The United States desperately needs to recapitalize the US dollar. Again, as you can appreciate, Russia, China, India, they have formed, and there are other nations involved, but they have formed the BRICS nations, the BRICS organization, which is for the purpose of recapitalizing the participating members of BRICS, recapitalizing their currencies, recapitalizing their debts based upon accessing the resources, the natural resources found in Ukraine. Russia is representing the BRICS nations, and along with Russia, China. And so this becomes really a two-party conflict. On the one hand, you have parties that are involved in maintaining the US dollar as the reserve currency for the world. That's one group. So think of Western Europe, think of Japan, think of Taiwan, and of course the United States. So this is one group of nations aligned, arrayed against the BRICS nations. The BRICS nations, of course, geographically led by Russia because, of course, it borders Ukraine, and of course, Ukraine was part of the former Soviet Union. There's a lot of media propaganda regarding the reasons for the conflict in Ukraine, but the real issue is economic. This is a war between the US dollar and the BRICS cryptocurrency. China has positioned itself through the acquisition over the last 20-some years, acquisition of tons and tons and tons of gold, physical gold. China holds the largest quantity of physical gold that has been extracted from the ground of any country on the planet, and in addition has acquired the control, the ownership and control by way of investing in gold mines around the world. So therefore, this is a war to reset the debt-based global economy. You've heard about the World Economic Forum and pushing the concept of a reset. Klaus Schwab is infamous for saying back in June of 2020 that because of COVID, there is a narrow window of opportunity for a global reset, an economic reset. That agenda item is still on the table. The struggle for natural resources, including gold, by BRICS and by the dollar-aligned nations as the opposing group, is for a post-reset environment. There will still be what Klaus Schwab has advocated for, the WEF, the groups, the members, the participants in WEF, of which Putin is part of that group of the WEF, as of course many other national leaders. The concept is to eliminate all debts globally, personal and state debts, to zero out the debt clock, globally speaking, and reset that clock and begin a new paradigm of a global economy based upon a one world government, a one world order, a one world cryptocurrency based upon China's gold assets, so denominated in gold, again, a gold standard, a cryptocurrency presented by China, but really it is a global cryptocurrency irrespective of any sovereign nation, because the sovereignty of nations, the whole concept of individual states, goes away under a single global government. That government can only form if there is an agreed upon single currency, thus an agreed upon single economic paradigm, economic model. The new model is no longer a debt-based economy. That debt-based paradigm is eliminated. Along with the elimination of the debts of the old paradigm are the so-called assets. And this is what many people fail to appreciate about the statement of Klaus Schwab when he says, you will own nothing and be happy for it. Well, you have to drill down into ownership, the concept of ownership. That is eliminated. Assets in a debt-based economy only exist because they are assets derived from debts. Now, I'm not going to do a deep economic dive here. We do this in our live streams at anthonypatch.com for our subscribers in a private live stream forum, not on YouTube. But what I want just briefly to help you to appreciate is that the flip side of saying all debts are eliminated, it goes to zero, is that when you eliminate the debts and the debt-based system, you eliminate all existing assets. That means perceived wealth in the form of real estate, 401k retirements, even cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, all are eliminated because they're based upon debt, and all that goes away with the reset. So it eliminates debts and it eliminates perceived assets. The struggle over Ukraine's resources is because this new system must have an underlying physical asset class. It must have natural resources from which the value for the Chinese cryptocurrency will be based upon. Debts will no longer be allowed in the new system. Now, this is not a benevolent system. This is a system that is ruled by a global dictator, one global government, one cryptocurrency, one economic system. Okay? And this is a system that is accessed through a digital ID. Now, we won't do a deep dive here on YouTube about the digital ID. I identify that. I specifically identify and explain the digital ID in our live streams through anthonypatch.com. So what I want to help you appreciate is that Ukraine is sitting on $2 trillion worth of resources that will be added to the existing resources that will come under the control of the BRICS nations. The BRICS nations will prevail over the US dollar. It already has. The United States economy in the reset doesn't necessarily collapse. The US government does not necessarily default on its debts because the reset precedes the default. But the US government, and you can appreciate the deficit of debts that the US government faces right now, that default will not happen because other countries are on the verge of default, including Ukraine. As of August 1st, Zelensky announced that the Ukrainian state would no longer make any of their payments on their national sovereign debt. So this gives you a sense of how close the world is to the declaration of an economic global reset. So the question may arise, and we'll get to the military issues here as we move along in this Pulse presentation, Pieces of War. But the war is for the purpose of initiating, triggering the reset. Ukraine is teetering on the precipice of an economic defaulting on its debts. A default puts the brakes on the war machine in Ukraine. Ukraine can no longer finance through the United States. Finance in Ukraine can no longer finance its war machine. The U.S., for its part, is teetering on the precipice of defaulting on its debts, as are European nations. Russia, for its part, along with China, are the two healthiest economies on the planet, followed by India. So again, the BRICS nations today, economically, are in a better economic situation than those that are trying to continue the US dollar as the global reserve currency. What is about to take place in the Middle East, in addition to what is currently taking place with respect to Russia and Ukraine, is about to trigger the reset. And the reset is triggered by turning off the internet. A few weeks ago, we had a dry run. We had a demonstration. You'll recall that there were internet systems around the world. It was blamed upon an upgrade of a cybersecurity program for Microsoft operating systems. And around the world, there were significant outages that had a ripple effect throughout the world and then continued for several days in those ripple effects being felt. This was a demonstration as to how fragile and the lack of redundancy that there is in the internet. This was a propaganda campaign. It was a marketing campaign. It was a predictive programming campaign. It was to demonstrate to people, to plant in their mind the understanding that the internet actually is very fragile. So that when the switch, as I call this, throwing of the switch actually occurs, the global internet will go dark. All communications will go down. Because ultimately, even CB radios, ham radios, shortwave radios, terrestrial radio systems, cell phone systems, ultimately they are all digital. At some point, there is a weak link that is digital, even in what people would consider to be an analog system. So the throwing of the switch is actually very easy to accomplish. And this can occur with one node, one server farm, or one attack on undersea fiber optic cables and historically copper-based undersea cable systems where they terminate on land. There are a number of ways to take down the internet, but the point is it will be a cascading event that rapidly spreads around the world, blacking out the world. It will take down the electrical grid. This will be blamed upon the conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine. My expectation is this will be triggered and thus blamed on the use of tactical nuclear weapons, specifically in the Middle East. Now, let's stay with Ukraine because I want to also update you that Russian President Putin has declared, as of yesterday, because of what happened in Kursk and is continuing in Kursk, and I'll detail that out. Because this has been an attack by Ukrainian forces into Russian sovereign territory and the killing of Russian civilians, Putin has declared that the gloves are off, has now labeled Ukraine as a terrorist state, and therefore there will be no peace negotiations, and this will escalate. Of course, it's possible that there will be tactical nukes used in Ukraine, but because the agenda that is being pushed here is to preserve the natural resources in Ukraine, Russia is reluctant to pollute those natural resources through the use of tactical nukes. Same thing for the West. I believe the tactical nukes will be used in the Middle East, and I've delineated in previous pulses why I think that, but I will briefly again restate that. But I just want again to paint the picture of the inverted economic pyramid with derivatives at the top natural resources at the bottom, and all other debts and asset classes in between in this inverted, teetering pyramid. This inverted pyramid will be eliminated and will never be seen again. This includes all of the quadrillions of derivatives, all wiped out, because none of these debts can be repaid by any state. The global economy already is in default status, okay? So that's the way things are lining up economically. With respect to more of the Middle East perspective, I call this part of the pieces of war the jigsaw pieces. The jigsaw pieces here that I'd like to just connect for you are Russia, China, and Iran. And it's interesting, but I put Israel this way as a smaller player from a geographic standpoint, from an economic standpoint, from a military standpoint. Israel is the smallest piece in this jigsaw puzzle of pieces. The primary players here are Iran, Russia, and China. So let's take Russia and China. They have an agreement, we could call it a handshake agreement at this point, as to a mutual defense plan and a mutually beneficial economic plan. Russia and China really have historically not been allies, but they are now. Okay, so those two jigsaw puzzle pieces are now joined together. Let's take China and Iran. Same thing. China has made it very clear that they are backing Iran. Whatever Iran needs to do with respect to Israel, China is backing Iran, as China is also backing Russia. If you think of it in terms of a mutual defense pact, if Iran is attacked, Russia will defend Iran. If Russia is attacked, and the initiator of this, the instigator, the antagonist, of course, is Israel in this scenario. I'm not taking sides. I'm just sharing you the perspective of these three players. If Russia is attacked by Israel, China and Iran will defend Russia. Then Iran, if it is attacked by Russia, both Russia and China and North Korea, I need to put that small puzzle but significant puzzle piece in the puzzle game, the puzzle that we're assembling. They are all backing Iran. An additional jigsaw puzzle piece, focusing on Iran as the center point of this puzzle, is Iraq. Also Syria. Also Lebanon. And Pakistan. And Turkey. And the Yemenis, and to a very lesser extent, Egypt. Now the Palestinians, for their part, they're not able to do much, but they are backing Iran politically. And China, with respect to the Palestinians, has signed 14 members of the Palestinian factions or groups, including Hamas, were invited to Beijing and just signed a pact with China, bringing all these factions together, setting aside their individual squabbles in return for the support of China in the formation of a sovereign Palestinian state. And this is backed economically by China as well as militarily and politically. Politically, think of the UN, if you will. Okay? So the Palestinians have all of China backing them up. And because China is connected in this jigsaw puzzle with Russia, politically, economically, militarily, the Palestinians now have Russia backing them. And so too all the other nations that fit into this puzzle. China, in successfully pulling together the Palestinian factions, now as, in China's eyes at least, and China's partners, view the Palestinians now as a single state, as a sovereign state. Thus, they are defending that sovereign state. This includes Gaza. When Israel assassinated in Tehran the peace negotiator for Hamas, his last name was Hanayi. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, but the peace negotiator that was killed in Tehran. This, of course, is received and considered by China as a slap in the face to China, because this assassination took place after this agreement was signed between the 14 Palestinian factions that included Hamas. The assassination took place after this agreement was signed with China by way of the Palestinians, who China now considers a sovereign state. Thus, this was an attack against the sovereign Palestinian state by Israel. And China culturally needs to save face. This was a slap in the face of the Chinese, who had just brokered this peace deal, if you will, amongst the 14 Palestinian factions. So China has yet another reason to be involved with these nations that are coming against Israel. Okay, let's get down into the warfare aspect of this. Russia, as I've reported in the last two Pulse broadcasts, delivered electronic countermeasure systems that have a 5,000 kilometer range of effect. These ECMs jam the navigation systems, the targeting systems of ballistic missiles, strategic missiles, medium-range missiles launched by Israel and the United States, as well as the navigation systems and communication systems of U.S. and Israeli aircraft. 5,000 kilometer range. Also, as I've reported, Russia has delivered to Tehran the S-400, and this isn't really mentioned very often, but the latest version, the S-500, missile interceptor systems delivered to Iran, along with hypersonic missiles. Iran now is well equipped, okay? Israel their finance minister, a little over a week ago, Smotrich, I believe is the pronunciation, or Smotrich, the finance minister for Israel, stated that the goal of Israel, the government of Israel, led by Netanyahu, is to obliterate the Palestinians, to allow 2 million Palestinians to starve to death. He said the world may not allow that to occur, but that is their intention. That is their goal, is to allow the 2 million Palestinians to just starve to death. Obviously, what's going on in terms of bombing and shooting and the activities of the IDF in Gaza is a genocide. And again, I'm not taking positions here, but this is how it is being reported and characterized. This is a humanitarian crisis. And when this kind of language of allowing people to starve to death, that's genocide. Remember, the Chinese, with respect to the Palestinians, now have a toehold. This is how I characterize this agreement that the Chinese have brokered with the 14 Palestinian factions. This provides a toehold in the Middle East, in Israel, really, a toehold in that territory. This is an economic toehold, this is a political, this is a military toehold in the Middle East for China. So let's go back to Ukraine and we'll wrap up what is happening there with respect specifically to the area of Kursk. Okay? You may have heard that over the past several days, Ukrainian forces were diverted from the Donbass region in the southeastern portion of Ukraine, the Donbass, which is inhabited by Russian-speaking, culturally Russian-speaking Ukrainian residents who actually view themselves and align themselves as more Russian than Ukrainian. And the Western Ukrainians really, from an ethnic standpoint, hate the Russians in the Donbass. Russian forces have taken control of the Donbass region. There was still a front line in what I would call the western portion of the Donbass, so moving from Russia into Ukraine. And this, on the part of Putin, this is the only area that Putin has sought post-conflict to occupy, because the people there want to be annexed into Russia. They do not want to be a part of Ukraine. Several brigades, 2 or 3 brigades of highly trained, well-equipped Ukrainian forces have been on that front line, that battle front line of the Donbass, separating from the remainder of Ukraine, and have been fighting with Russian forces there. And this is where the bulk of the Ukrainian losses have been taking place, to a much lesser degree than the losses that Russia has been experiencing. About a 10-to-1 ratio. Ukrainians have been experiencing, not just in the Donbass, but over all of the fronts, about 2,000 Ukrainian personnel being killed and wounded, seriously wounded, 2,000 per day, for weeks on end now. At any rate, 2 or perhaps 3 highly trained, experienced, well-equipped brigades, Ukrainian brigades, were moved northward to the region of Kursk, and this has been described in the media as the Ukrainian forces identifying a weak point with respect to the Russian line, the Russian front. It's, by my estimation, a deliberate weak point that was allowed by Putin and his generals, allowed to develop a weak point, purposefully allowed, lately in the last few live streams, I've been talking about warfare. I've been talking about identity warfare, persistent surveillance. Russia has excellent persistent surveillance over the entire Ukrainian region, and certainly along the battle lines, the fronts. They knew that this area, the Kursk area, would be perceived by the Ukrainian forces as a weak point. They set up this weak point, Russia did, deliberately to draw these brigades. These are, again, the strongest forces that Ukraine has, to draw them to this self-imposed weak point by Russia. And Russia knew they were going to experience civilian losses and damage to infrastructure. But they were willing to do that for the purpose of drawing these forces into a trap. Now, in our private live streams about 2 months ago, I outlined this. And I portrayed this as an envelope. When we talk about biology in our live streams, there is a biological process with respect to an individual cell that when a virus seeks to invade and infect a cell, it enters the cytoplasm of the cell by first bulging the plasma membrane, the protective membrane around a cell. The virus will actually push in and bulge that membrane inward into the cytoplasm, and then eventually behind the virus, the membrane envelops the virus as it fully enters the cytoplasm. This is called endocytosis. Well, this is essentially what is happening to these brigades. They are bulging into Russia, and they've already done this. They've entered in to Russia about 12 kilometers into Russia, and about 4 kilometers wide is this bulging into sovereign Russian territory. This is the endocytosis by Ukrainian forces that has been deliberately allowed on the part of Russia, because now they can envelop, and this will be over the course of the next few days, there will be a complete envelopment of these Ukrainian forces. And again, these are the best equipped, most experienced, best trained forces that Ukraine has, and they're about to be obliterated. This is going to be a meat grinder. There will be no escape. They will be completely enveloped by Russian forces, and this is by design. And the persistent surveillance systems that Russia has, they're watching this whole thing play out. The media has been, the mainstream narrative, as I call mainstream media, has been making a big deal about the success of Ukraine against Russia. Now you know the real story of what's going on and what is about to happen, okay? I want to kind of wrap this up because we're pushing almost an hour. Putin has said their approach now, having labeled Ukraine as a terrorist state, and I said Putin has declared just yesterday there will be no peace talks. Russia has claimed, Putin has claimed that they have made attempts, they've made overtures to trying to engage Ukraine in peace talks. He said that's off the table. He also said Russia will no longer take any prisoners. They're taking the gloves off with Ukraine. because Russian civilians have been killed by Ukrainian forces in Kursk, as well as destruction of Russian infrastructure. Again, appreciating this was deliberate on the part of the Russian generals and Putin, okay? But they're trying to bring an end to the war before the end of the year. Remember, winter's coming. Russia does not want to fight this war during the winter. Of course, they have previously, but they want to bring an end to this. The Russian people, from the reports that I've seen, the Russian people in general are now demanding Putin and his generals bring an end to the war decisively. They're not talking about peace. People are demanding retribution, if you will, for these civilian losses. They want Ukrainian forces wiped out and Ukraine brought to its knees. Now, Putin, again, has made it very clear he does not intend to occupy all of Ukraine. Economically, that would be disastrous for the Russian economy. Militarily, he doesn't have the resources to do that, nor does he want to support that cost, that military cost. But he wants a neutral, politically, economically, the alignment with NATO and the U.S. He wants to enforce neutrality now on the part of Ukraine, denying it membership in NATO, denying U.S. activities. He wants a neutral government to be established in Ukraine. But he will retain the Donbass, as I said earlier. Okay? So, I think that pretty much covers my notes for today. I hope this proves to be useful for you and it gives you an appreciation of the big picture. Remember, what's going on with Ukraine is primarily a battle over the control of their natural resources. So Putin will take control of those natural resources, but that will be post-reset. Putin will not take control of the Ukrainian resources until after the global reset, the economic reset, which is triggered by the flipping of the switch, taking down the global economy and electrical grid, which itself is triggered by the employment by Israel first of tactical nuclear weapons against Iran. What's being portrayed right now as the trigger for the long-awaited attack by Iran against Israel, which has been, as I've outlined this in previous pulses, this is all preparation. They have Iran, Russia, China, North Korea, Pakistan, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and Egypt have all been coordinating and putting in place, again, Russia bringing in systems to Iran itself, and also the Iraqis, okay, in alignment. All of this time perceived as a delay, a mysterious delay. There's nothing mysterious about the delay on the part of Iran attacking Israel. It's preparation. Because all of these jigsaw puzzle pieces as nations understand that Israel is in the position, militarily, economically, and politically, that Israel will preemptively strike against Iran and all of the other jigsaw puzzle pieces by way of Iran and Iraq and Syria. Damascus will cease to exist overnight. It will be uninhabitable overnight, Damascus in Syria. That's one target that I can give you that specificity to. But what has been portrayed in the media is that Hezbollah is being labeled as the most likely to initiate the big war, the big conflict that's coming in the Middle East, that cannot be avoided. It can't be turned around. There is no peace on the horizon. But it is not Hezbollah necessarily. Again, I went into detail yesterday in our live stream, but I'll give you a snippet, a synopsis of it. Persistent surveillance. Again, Israel is surveilling the human activities related to the missile systems in Iran and Iraq, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and even to an extent the missile systems of Pakistan, which is nuclear. Israel is not going to wait for the missile motors to be ignited to then launch against Iran and the other targets. Okay, this will be simultaneous targeting of Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, Iran, possibly even Pakistan. Israel is not going to wait for the launch or the motors to be ignited. They're watching the human activities that will initiate the launches. Therefore, it will be a preemptive strike by Israel using tactical nukes because they don't have the personnel, they don't have the bombs, they don't have the missiles, they don't have the drones, they don't have enough aircraft in the IDF Air Force as well as U.S. aircraft. There are not sufficient forces for all of these fronts to be attacked all at the same time. There's no ability to launch a preemptive simultaneous attack on all of these targets on the part of Israel. Therefore, conventional is not, in my estimation, conventional is not feasible. On the other side of the table, Iran, Russia, North Korea, China, all understand this. They understand that Israel can only go nuclear. I explained this again in private live streams, but I'll give it to you here. You've probably heard of the Samson option, S-A-M-S-O-N, Samson option on the part of Israel. Most people consider the Samson option to be a defensive action, that Israel compassed, surrounded by its enemies, and being attacked by its enemies. In other words, there's an active war against Israel taking place on all fronts. That Israel, at that point, launches all of its nukes, knowing that they, in doing so, will also be attacked by nuclear warheads, nuclear missiles. And they will be killed. But Israel is committing suicide knowing that they're also simultaneously wiping out their enemies. That's the common presumption of the Samson option. The actual one is not defensive. It is offensive. It is preemptive. It is launching, and this is imminent, I think. This is simultaneous launching by Israel preemptively all of their nuclear missiles against all of these targets simultaneously before anything is even launched by Hezbollah or Iran or anyone else. Certainly, these other nations, these forces, these groups will detect the launch of these missiles from Israel, and they too will then initiate their launch of conventional and tactical nukes against Israel. So it is the Samson option, but it needs to be understood that it is initiated. It is a preemptive offensive move. of the Samson option of all of the nukes at once, that scenario triggers the internet being taken down. That's the flipping of the switch event. The internet goes down, the electrical grid globally goes down, the economic system zeroes out, the reset, and then post-warfare, post-war, if anybody's left, that's their plan. When I say their plan, let's just put a label. Let's call it the WEF plan, but it's more than just the WEF. But just to kind of wrap this up, the plan is that this is survivable and that a new economy can be established. Well, it'll be very limited. Certainly the Middle East going nuclear doesn't mean that the entire planet goes nuclear. The US may get hit by Russia, by China, but China will still be there, Russia will still be there, the BRICS nations, so to speak, will still be there. So the one world leader, the one world government, the one world cryptocurrency, the one world new paradigm of a global economy with a digital ID, and whoever survives, that's how they see it. We shall see. God bless you all.